Hello, this is Mr. White. I'm going to be reading from the 7th grade science textbook. We are in Chapter 6. This is Lesson 1, What is Heredity? My Planet Diary. Almost forgotten. When scientists make great discoveries, sometimes their work is praised, criticized, or even forgotten. Gregor Mendel was almost forgotten. He spent 8 years studying pea plants, and he discovered patterns in the way characteristics passed from one generation to the next. For almost 40 years, people overlooked Mendel's work. When it was finally rediscovered, it unlocked the key to understanding heredity. What did Mendel observe? In the mid-19th century, a priest named Gregor Mendel tended a garden in a Central European monastery. Mendel's experiments in that peaceful garden would one day transform the study of heredity. Heredity is the passing of physical characteristics from parents to offspring. Mendel wondered why different pea plants had different characteristics. Some pea plants grew tall, while others were short. Some pea plants produced green seeds, while others had yellow seeds. Each specific characteristic, such as a stem height or seed color, is called a trait. Mendel observed that the forms of the pea plant's traits were often similar to those of their parents. Sometimes, however, the forms differed. Mendel's experiments. Mendel experimented with thousands of pea plants. Today, Mendel's discoveries form the foundation of genetics, the scientific study of heredity. Figure 1 shows the parts of a pea plant's flower. The pistil produces female sex cells, or eggs. The stamen produces pollen, which contains the male sex cells, or sperm. A new organism begins to form when egg and sperm join cells in the process called fertilization. Before fertilization can happen in pea plants, pollen must reach the pistil of a pea flower. This process is called pollination. Pea plants are usually self-pollinating. In self-pollination, pollen from a flower lands on the pistil of the same flower. Mendel developed a method by which he cross-pollinated or crossed pea plants. Figure 1 shows his method. Mendel decided to cross plants that had contrasting forms of a trait. For example, tall plants and short plants. He started with purebred plants. A purebred organism is the offspring of many generations that have the same form of a trait. For example, purebred tall pea plants always come from tall parent plants. The F1 and F2 offspring. Mendel crossed purebred tall plants with purebred short plants. Today, scientists call these plants the parental or P generation. The resulting offspring are the first phyla, or F1 generation. The word phyla comes from philia and phylus, the Latin words for daughter and son. Look at Figure 2 to see the surprise Mendel found in the F1 generation. All the offspring were tall. The shortness trait seems to have disappeared. When these plants were full grown, Mendel allowed them to self-pollinate. The F2, second phyla generation, followed, surprised Mendel even more. He counted the plants of the F2 generation. About 3/4 were tall, while 1/4 were short. Experiments with other traits. Mendel repeated his experiments, studying other pea plant traits such as flower color and seed shape. In all of his crosses, Mendel found that only one form of trait appeared in the F1 generation. However, in the F2 generation, the lost form of the trait always reappeared in about 1/4 of the plants. How do alleles affect inheritance? Mendel reached several conclusions from his experimental results. He reasoned that individual factors, or sets of a genetic information, must control the inheritance of traits in peas. The factors that control each trait exist in pairs. The female parent contributes one factor, while the male parent contributes another factor. Finally, one factor in a pair can mask or hide the other factor. The tallness factor, for example, masks the shortness factor. Genes and alleles. Today, scientists use the word gene to describe the factors that control a trait. Alleles are the different forms of a gene. The gene that controls stem height in peas has one allele for tall stems and one allele for short stems. Each pea plant inherits two alleles, one from the egg and one from the sperm. A plant may inherit 2 alleles for tall stems, 2 alleles for short stems, or one of each. An organism's traits are controlled by the alleles it inherits from its parents. Some alleles are dominant, while other alleles are recessive. A dominant allele is one whose trait always shows up in the organism when the allele is present. A recessive allele, on the other hand, is hidden whenever the dominant allele is present. Figure 3 shows dominant and recessive alleles of the traits in Mendel's crosses. Alleles in Mendel's crosses. In Mendel's cross for stem height, the purebred tall plants in the P generation had 2 alleles for tall stems. The purebred short plants had 2 alleles for short stems. But each F1 plant inherited 1 allele for tall stems and 1 allele for short stems. The F1 plants are called hybrids. A hybrid organism has 2 different alleles for a trait. All the F1 plants are tall because the dominant allele for tall stems makes the recessive allele for short stems. Symbols for alleles. Geneticists, scientists who study genetics, often use letters to represent alleles. A dominant allele is symbolized by a capital letter. A recessive allele is symbolized by the allele for tall. A recessive allele is symbolized by the lowercase version of the same letter. For example, capital T stands for the allele for tall stems, and lowercase t stands for the allele for short stems. When a plant has 2 dominant alleles for tall stems, its alleles are written as capital T, capital T. When a plant has 2 recessive alleles for short stems, its alleles are written as lowercase t, lowercase t. These plants are the P generation shown in Figure 4. Think about the symbols that would be used for F1 plants that inherit 1 allele for tall stems and 1 for short stems. The significance of Mendel's contribution. Mendel's discovery of genes and alleles eventually changed scientists' ideas about heredity. Before Mendel, most people thought that the traits of individual organisms were simply a blend of the parent's characteristics. Mendel showed that offspring traits are determined by individual, separate alleles inherited from each parent. Unfortunately, the value of Mendel's discovery was not known during his lifetime. But when scientists in the early 1900s rediscovered Mendel's work, they quickly realized its importance. Because of his work, Mendel is often called the father of genetics.